Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give a few minutes here for everyone to join up with us here. Should be starting in just about a minute or so.
Hey, Justin.
Hey, how's it going, Freak? Can you hear me?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, our mic's a little quiet. It sounds like it's using a different microphone or something.
All right. How about now?
It'll sound a little spotty for me. Hey, Nazar, how's it going?
Hey.
Wait for the moment here.
Hey, Justin. How do
Hey,
I
Pradeep,
sound now?
that's much better. It's a little
Yeah.
bit of an echo, but not too bad.
Great.
All right. Take it
Let's
away.
just give maybe another minute for guys to join in. Hey, the general. Nice to see you.
Lots of familiar faces today.
Yeah.
Nice to see you all. Thanks for joining us.
Great.
Pradeep will be taking it away in just a moment here.
Yeah. Let's just give it another minute for folks to join.
Hey, Jim, how's it going?
Hey, Jim. Welcome to the stage. All right. Emil, welcome on board.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, so happy, excited to see you all. And thank you, first and foremost, our gratitude to you, everyone in the audience. Thank you so much for your interest, for your participation, and for adding this event into your busy calendars. A special high five to the Ambassador Squad for your daily grind and dedication, working hard, testing like crazy, providing tech support to the entire community, and such excellent job moderating the various phases. And believe me, we didn't miss those of you spreading the word and creating buzz on social media with your cool videos, infographics, very funny memes. We truly appreciate you. Now, speaking of ambassadors, a moment now to welcome and congratulate our brand new cohort of 16 apprentice ambassadors. Looks like we got some of them right here in the house. And our consideration, of course, to everyone who showed interest and took the time and effort to submit the applications. To those who didn't make it, the cut this time, I assure we will be back soon with another round of recruitment. So stay tuned, please hang tight and bear with us. Now, here on stage, one of our founders and CTO, Nazar, honored to have you here, my friend. And on my left, Justin, Master of Community Support, gracing the stage as always. Thank you for having our backs, bro.
Of course, happy to be here. Thanks everybody for joining us as well. Hopefully we'll have a fun little launch party here.
And I almost made a mistake, actually a major mistake, of calling the other two individuals as new kids on the block. Quite the contrary, they are actually seasoned, esteemed, and well-known faces in our community. Seriously, the coolest and most moving thing is seeing former ambassadors and community members become full-time subspacers. So let's give it up for Emil and Jim. A round of applause. Welcome, bros. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Fredrik. Really happy to be here.
Jim or Emil, whoever wants to start, can you illuminate your pathway to become full-time subspacers? How did the road look like?
Sure, yeah, I can get us started. Jim, I think that you are muted, but we do not hear you. So I'll just go ahead and go first, and I'll let you figure out your mic settings probably. Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Emil. I would say that some of you might know me because I've been like an ambassador for a year and a half for Subspace, and now like in June, just a month ago, I turned a full-time employee of Subspace. And let me just share what's the road to becoming a Subspace staff has been to me. Like overall, I'm a petroleum engineer turned software developer, and now turned developer community manager. And everything, like all that happened in the last 6 years, and it's super crazy to think about it. So it's been an amazing journey for me. And I've been passionate about studying and researching blockchains since about 2017, and it was during the first like massive bull market. It was the time when I first came to realize that blockchains are indeed our future, and it's always better to stay ahead of the game and get familiar with the technology. But the first like real project I started to participate in was Chia, and it was back in 2020. And it was, it still is one of the first proof of capacity blockchains. And I was really impressed how the team solved the problems with the large energy consumption and making almost no compromises to the security. At that time, I set up my first farm, and I even had like a really small side hustle when I built a few Chia farms locally in Vancouver. And it was super fun, to get to know the people, to actually chat with some of the community of Chia, and to actually get to work on building computers and selecting proper components, and so clients can utilize all the hard drives. But after a few months, I was working and really being a part of the community of Chia, I came to realize that the user experience wasn't really the best. And exactly at that time, I stumbled across the Subspace and read through the white paper. And if I'm honest, I didn't understand most of it probably, but there were a few things that stood out to me. Like first, it was super energy efficient, it was secure, and it solved the farmer's dilemma. So these three things totally caught my attention, and I joined the Telegram, joined the Discord, and started asking questions and communicating with the team. In a couple of months from there was a first selection to become ambassadors, and I, alongside 5 other people, we were selected as a first ambassadors cohort. And during the first 2 months, we completed full education, get familiar with the team, It was super amazing process until we become like ambassadors for the Subspace. And for the last year and a half, I've been really focused on working on the documentation and some of the like learning and educational materials for Subspace. Like it was internal documentation and external. And since June 5th, so like for exactly a month ago, I joined Subspace as a full-time employee. And now I'm working on the developer onboarding experience. So as you know, we'll be focusing on documentation for actually utilizing Subspace core EVM for developers. So if you want to learn more about it, we will be releasing a lot of materials pretty soon. So yeah, stay tuned.
Awesome, Emil. That's quite an interesting journey. They say that
Yeah, for sure.
they say the crooked roads without improvement are the roads of genius. How did yours look like, Jim? Jim, you might
Okay.
be. Hey.
Can you hear me now? Okay, it's pushed to
Sure,
talk.
yeah, loud and
All right.
clear.
Yeah, thanks, Pratik and Emil. Hi, everyone. So my name's Jim. I've been an enterprise developer for the last 20 years in finance and telecoms, working mainly on the Microsoft stack. I started getting into blockchain and Web3 back in 2020 when I was asked to run DevOps for a team operating a testnet indexer on the graph. That project gave me an itch for infrastructure as code, which I found a number of blockchain projects could scratch. After a while, a friend referred me to Subspace as something he thought I would find interesting. I joined in the middle of the Aries testnet, got my farm running and participated in the stress test. And as I started to read more about the project and understood the problems it was solving, I decided it was something that I could really get behind. I love the eco-friendly consensus and the opportunity to harness underutilized hardware around the world. I hit the Gemini testnet hard and used it as an opportunity to sharpen my DevOps skills by working out ways to maximize the return on the hardware I had available to me. At this stage, I was pestering Justin quite regularly about the limits we could take the software to. I also enjoyed providing P2P support in Discord and on the forum to help get newbies and their nodes up and running. I imagine there are a few in the audience today who I've conversed with. I decided to apply for ambassadorship when the next cohort was announced. I was accepted and have made some great friendships within the program and the community at large. And when Subspace started building out their team in preparation for mainnet, Diana approached me and asked if I would like to try out for a role with the team. I applied for a DevOps position, but as it isn't really my core competency, they had much better candidates applying than me. So I was passed over, but I was also told that there could be a community role for me. I interviewed for that role, and here we are today. I'm now the head of ecosystem, which means I'm ultimately responsible for looking after the three pillars of our community: node operators, token holders, and developers, as well as our wonderful ambassadors. I'm super happy to be here, and I hope my story and Emil's story is an inspiration to everyone in the community who may be considering a career in blockchain or Web3.
Thank you, Jim. Well, what a wild trajectory. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, into the 3E, Gemini 3E subject. I have noticed there were some improvements reported by our ambassadors and community members. It appears that a number of errors also apparently got resolved either throughout 3D or maybe as a result of the new 3E. I wonder, Nazar, what specific upgrades do you see reflected in version 3E? And any exciting developments we should keep our eyes on?
Hey guys, it's been a while since I was a speaker on one of these. Hello. I should start probably that at the beginning of the month we had protocol engineers offsite, and we had a lot of fruitful discussions about how we can improve the protocol, how we can implement it. And if you've been following our GitHub, you can notice that we had quite a spike in activity, which is always nice to see. And a lot of that is related to Gemini 3E and Gemini 3F, which I'll touch a little bit on as well. So if you remember on Gemini 3D, we had archiving process from the new consensus, but we didn't have really new consensus yet. So we've been iterating on the new consensus for the last year, and we started with 2.0, then 2.12. The latest one is 2.3, and that's what we have on Gemini 3E. It is more efficient than the previous versions. It is also much smaller in terms of the blockchain footprint. So some of the community members have noticed that the sync process is faster. It's not really faster. It's just that blocks are much smaller because our consensus doesn't include so much data in the header anymore, which was always the goal. From there, we also have some improvements in terms of the networking. On Gemini 3D, initially we had issues with the consumer routers not being able to keep up. We mostly resolved that by the end of Gemini 3D, and on Gemini 3 it's still even better. And there is still one more thing that Shamil is working on that will kind of finish that line of effort and make it really, really good. Other things is in the past we had quite high requirements for the node disk space, so you had to keep the whole history, but that was kind of the farmer's dilemma side of the white paper, which we were planning to resolve. I'm happy to say that it is mostly resolved in a sense that we don't have this experimental sync from DSN feature, but at this point it is kind of feature complete. The next step is to test it and resolve a few small issues, and at that point our community nodes will no longer need to have archival mode enabled, which means your node will occupy a few gigabytes. It will never go beyond those few gigabytes. So you can dedicate all of the space you have to actually farming, which is why you are starting the node in the first place in most cases. The domains has changed a few times. I think on one of the next calls we'll have more details, but as you noticed, we have EVM domain, which means you can use any existing contract, so you can write your own contract in Solidity and you'll be able to deploy it to Subspace, which is easier probably for many people who are familiar with that. What else? There are some things which are still not exactly finished, but well on the way. They were not included in Gemini 3E, but they will be included in Gemini 3F. We have disabled domains temporarily on 3E. They will be enabled on 3F again with much simpler construction and more efficient. The other thing is you may have noticed that on last few networks, when you plot initially, you don't really change the plot afterwards. That was just something we didn't implement, but it is in progress. Farmers will replot their space slowly over time, just like in Gemini 2A. And we are working on proof of time, which is the component that protects the network from long-range attacks and some of the other nasty things. And Rahul is responsible person for that, and we have some good progress there. So Gemini 3F will also include that improvement. And I'd like to ask you to bear with us as we develop the protocol. What I mean by that is we are currently primarily focusing on feature completeness of the protocol and security, a little bit less on the usability. So there could be some rough edges. If you notice them, please report. We'll work on them. But the first priority for us is to build the secure, reliable protocol. And from there, once we have a good foundation, we can kind of improve on that. So if you want to run 100 plots with a few petabytes each, may not quite happen on Gemini 3E, but hopefully in the very nearest future. I think those are the main few things, and I think we'll have some questions from the community, so I'll be able to expand on anything that might be of interest.
Of course. Thank you, Nazar, for the detail, such a detailed outline of where we stand now and what is to come. Eager to hear a trailer of Proof of Time. And I'm already seeing a number of technical questions on the chat. If the community doesn't disagree, we can move forward with the installation walkthrough and leave a longer lasting Q&A session at the end, so we can have more space to debate more complex issues. Justin, can I pass the mic to you so that we can help the community through a walkthrough of the installation?
Yeah, so we'll do a quick walkthrough installation tutorial. For any of you who have participated in the past, it's not much different from our simple CLI in 3D in prior versions, but obviously we want to make sure that everyone is empowered to get up and running with no major issues. So let's jump right into it. Give me just a moment here to get my screen share going, and we will get moving forward. All right. Should be able to see my screen. Awesome. Alrighty. So to start with, first thing, as you know, most blockchains, we're going to want to start with our documentation. That's going to be simply docs.subspace.network. If you look in the chat, I just posted a link there for everybody. And we'll just go ahead and click the docs in the top left, and we'll go ahead and get started with farming. Now, when it comes to our farmer, we have two processes. We have our simple CLI and the advanced CLI is mostly going to be used if you're messing around with development or massive like multi-disk farms, things along those lines. For most users, you know, if you're just running off your desktop or your laptop or something along those lines, the simple CLI will probably be the recommended route for you to go. And it's definitely a little bit easier and smoother as well. So that's what we'll be covering today. Within the simple CLI, we start off, we can see we have our prerequisites and system requirements. One thing to keep in mind with farming is that it is very network intensive. You know, if you're running off of like a 4G hotspot or some kind of bandwidth limited internet, I probably would suggest to not quite use farming on that network. It's just going to eat all your bandwidth up and you're not going to have a great experience rather quickly. So one thing to keep in mind is you are going to want, you know, a pretty liberal internet plan if you are going to be farming actively, really on any blockchain network, but something to keep in mind with Subspace as well. As far as the system requirements go, on the CPU side, we do require about a 4-core plus CPU. You can get away with slightly less, but you'll have to pull some finagling and some special configurations. So recommended, we recommend 4 cores, and we also recommend about 8 gigabytes of RAM as well. And you will also want 100 gigabytes of storage on Subspace with the new consensus that Nazar mentioned, that is going to be SSDs. In the past, we've supported hard drives. That support is dwindling, unfortunately, and we will be moving towards a more SSD-friendly as we progress forward. And then you will also want some swap space on your drive. This is really something to keep in mind if you're on Linux. If you're on Windows or Mac, your swap is generally automatically taken care of for you on the back end. Alrighty, we'll keep scrolling along. One thing to keep in mind for all you Linux users is just to watch out if you're using the COW file system. But beyond that, most file systems shouldn't really give you any issues. As all farming, we will need a wallet. So you'll need a Substrate wallet in our case. So you can use the Polkadot.js wallet, Sub wallet, or any other, you know, Polkadot Kusama Substrate-based wallet should also work pretty well as well. We do have a little setup tutorial section for our wallets on our documentation here, but we won't quite dive into that. So a little out of scope for our tutorial today. Additionally, you will need some ports forwarded on your router for farming to work effectively and properly. That will be ports 30333 and 30433. And that we also do have a tutorial for that as well in our how to forward port section right here for anyone who may have not done that prior. Not too complicated, but we tried to make our guide as all-inclusive as possible for everybody. All right, now we'll go down to the actual meat and potatoes. So we'll start with, obviously, downloading our binaries. In our docs, we have tabs here for our 3 major operating systems. Really, any Debian-based Linux should work with the Ubuntu ones. And obviously, you can try other Linux distros as well, but Ubuntu is officially what is supported. In my case, I'm currently on Windows on this system, so I'll go with Windows. And you'll notice we have 2 versions. We have a version 2 and a version 3. This is just for the year of CPU you have. So if your processor is a little bit older, from 2009 and past, you probably want to use version 2. But if your processor is newer, relatively 2015 era or newer, you probably want to use version 3. Specifically, what this is for ADX support for anyone who knows what that is. But most newer systems will probably use version 3 in this case. So I'll go ahead and download that. It'll just pop up, and we can save that to wherever we'd like. In my case, I'm just going to save it to our downloads. And then from here, we will want to open PowerShell. So if you're on Windows, do not use Command Prompt. You're going to want to use PowerShell, as Command Prompt does have some differences that just make our command a little complicated. I'll just do a split screen here with that. Alrighty. As we can see on step 2, first step is to change to the directory that you downloaded your files in. In most cases, that will be downloads. And we'll keep scrolling, and we'll get to this configuration section, which will give us our first command, which is this init command. So the init command is just for initialize. That will just simply be to get you to initialize and kind of get the initial settings set up for your farmer. So in this case, we can just copy and paste that and hit enter. We'll see we get some nice ASCII art here. And then it'll ask, do we have an existing farmer/reward address? So one of the new features in the CLI is you can actually make your reward address natively in the CLI if you do not have a wallet. I, in my case, do, so I'll go ahead and hit Y for yes. And it's going to ask me for my reward address, so I'll just get that from my wallet here. And this is going to be the Subspace version of your address. With Polkadot wallets, you can kind of select which chain you will be using, and that will actually change the address. So a default substrate address will start with 5.
Justin, I think you're still sharing the browser window. Maybe it's just me.
Let me make sure my terminal is sharing. Thank you. There we go. Looks like that's better. Great. So as far as the reward address, you'll just want to make sure yours starts with the ST. That stands for Subspace Testnet. Obviously, that will change slightly once we get to mainnet as well. But we'll punch in our reward address and hit enter. And then we can type in, our node name. This doesn't necessarily have to be a unique value, but this will be the value that's shown on the telemetry. So it is public information, just keep that in mind. I'll just use my normal name. And then we'll ask us to specify where we want to store our plots. So it has a default pathway, but this would be where, if you had another drive installed or another place you wanted to store that data, you could specify that there. In this case, I'll just be going with the default as well. And then the same thing with the node files. You can also specify where the node data will be stored. Next, it will ask us for the plot size. The default is going to be 2 gigabytes. That is one thing that's changed from the previous version where it was 1 gigabyte. It is now 2 gigabytes due to some technical nuance that I'm sure Nazar could explain better than I can, but just make sure to start with that 2 gigabytes or anything above that. In my case, just for the sake of this tutorial, I'll stick with the default. And then it will ask us to specify the chain. So this is, whether it's Gemini 3D or 3E or the DevNet. In this case, we can see we have Gemini 3E as an option. So we will go with that guy. And then we can see we get a ready for liftoff, run the following command to begin. And this shows us the full file name, and then the command is farm. So we can just go ahead. And one thing is If you're in the directory, you can just hit tab to autocomplete, save yourself some time. And then we'll go ahead and hit farm. Next, we see we get a starting node. And sometimes maybe this starting node isn't quite enough detail that you're looking for. One thing that I often like to do with my CLI is add the verbose command. At least when I'm doing my initial setup, this will just output the logs into the terminal for you, so you can just kind of see what's occurring, make sure nothing's going wrong, and kind of see that output that you're getting. So as we can see, we're starting to get some output here. New storage provider initialized. Here, pretty rapidly, we should start to see some of the other things start to kick in. From there, that's pretty much everything for getting your simple CLI set up and running. You can always visit our telemetry server just to check and see if it's there. Mine's probably not quite there just yet, but you can always search as well. Mine's not just present, but kind of expected as we haven't gotten the rest of the startup process just yet. But from there, you're good to go, and you can keep monitoring your node and be good to go from there. I will toss it back over to you, Freddie.
Thank you, Justin. This is very illustrative. Thank you so much for your very clear step-by-step guidance. I've seen here a number of interesting questions popping up, and also glad to see that some of our community members were kind to address them. There was a special consideration by Lazy Penguin with some. He touched on many topics that we look forward to take. Like Jim said, take away internally and answer to those. Our messaging on either incentivized or non-incentivized have been clear in our communication, I hope. And if it was not, or whether or not we didn't manage the expectations well, we're happy to take your feedback and improve on those. But I don't want to. I've seen other technical questions or the plot size and performance regarding internet speed. I've seen that these were answered by community members or by Jim. Please, guys, let me know if I missed anyone on them, and feel free to address if I miss anyone.
Yeah, one of the goals for us in the upcoming networks will be to simplify the process with how much space question. So the simple CLI will just tell you how much space do you have, and you say I have 100 gigabytes, it will figure out how much space should be dedicated to plotting, to the node, to whatever else might be necessary. It will just take care of it. Right now, it's just not implemented, one of those rough edge cases.
Okay, let me see. I'm just checking the history here of quite possible unanswered questions.
I see there is an interesting question about IOPS on SSD.
Yes.
So I don't know how many IOPS it will be, but the way it works is that we have a plot, and that plot is sliced into sectors. And then for every sector that you have, the farmer will do an audit. And then when it does the audit, it will read, I believe, 32 kilobytes of data in a specific location, depending on the challenge. And then it will analyze those 32 kilobytes, whether you have a solution for the puzzle. And if you have a solution which is within the solution range, then you are kind of eligible to produce a solution. It might be a block, might be a vote, depending on how good that solution is. And then it will actually read a whole bunch more data, like thousands of requests, and it will assemble what it needs to assemble to actually prove to the consensus that you do have that data on your disk. So that's probably when you will see the most IOPS. But if you have, depending on the plot size, it will like scan the whole thing every single second. And from that, you have a lot of random access, which is input-output operations. And that's why we are saying that this new consensus is optimized for SSDs. Hard drives will simply not be able to physically move that quickly and do so many audits every second. So I would say it's expected. Whether we do more IOPS than the bare minimum necessary is a very good question. We'll look into it. But generally, we can expect a lot of random reads, which for SSD should be very energy efficient and easy.
Thanks, Nazar. I see a consideration here by Trader Short on problems on plot size. I wonder, Trader Short, maybe you could comment. Are you still experiencing these problems with plot size with this new version, or have you, or lately in your test?
Yes, another question too is whether or not the location of the server will be important. Yes and no. There's no necessarily real thing built into the consensus that's going to be a problem location-wise, but it is a consideration on any peer-to-peer network. So, for example, if you're the one person in Antarctica connecting to the peer-to-peer network, you're probably going to have a little bit slower experience in sync times and things like that. Than compared to if you were, in Europe, where there's like thousands of peers that are within a few hundred miles of you. So that's really where the location thing kind of comes into play, is just the proximity to your closest peer. But beyond that, it's not going to have too much of an effect. And in honesty, that's really more of like an internet speed thing, more so than participation on the network thing.
Actually, there is one improvement I forgot to mention that Rahul was working on. It is not sadly enabled by default, but it will be enabled by default in the next network, which is called compact blocks. You may remember since Bitcoin times, there were ideas how we can improve the latency of block propagation across the network. One of the ideas is that you have a block which consists of the header and transactions, but those transactions can be relatively large. However, as you are active participant of the network, you already probably seen some of those transactions, maybe all of them. So what we can do instead, we can send the header and hashes of transactions. And then if you have the transaction, you have seen it recently, you can kind of reconstruct the block locally without actually having the whole block. So that's something that was implemented in the code, and it will be enabled in the next version of the network, where even if you are in Antarctica somewhere, you will have lower latency and less bandwidth used with this new feature, because it will be just physically less data transferred over the network. And that will build into the even better feature, which is Graphene protocol, which doesn't even send the hashes of transactions. It is even more efficient than that. But that will take more time. Compact blocks will already be a big improvement. And that will play into the how network intensive the protocol is. There are a few upgrades of that kind that will decrease the network requirement, at least for farmers. For operators, it will be still intensive. That's kind of the goal. But for farmers, it will be more storage intensive than the bandwidth intensive in the end.
Thanks, Nazar. Just updating, following up with Trader Short's response. It appears by observing the initial testing that the plot size errors are no longer, they are seemingly no longer an issue. We look forward to the wider community's assessment on this, but I think that's one of the fixes that got resolved. We hopefully we won't see those in the new version anymore.
Another question we have here is the plots. Are they read-only? Do I need to get write-intensive SSDs or read-intensive SSDs? feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Nazar, but generally it's mostly read, but obviously there is a large write with the initial plot and any replotting, but it's mostly going to be reading most of the time, correct?
Yeah, I think these questions are often originate from experience with Shia, where SSDs are used to write and overwrite data multiple times. That's just how the construction works. In our case, initially, when you create the plot for the first time, yes, you will write it start to finish, but it is sequential. So even hard drives are okay for that. We are doing a lot of stuff in memory, but then we lay out the plot in such a way that we can write it sequentially. And then the idea after that is that the plot is not read-only, needs to be updated, but it is not updated very frequently. So some of those sectors I mentioned before will expire in random time in the future. And then those sectors that expired, you will have to recreate them using new data. That process shouldn't be very frequent. It will be more frequent initially when the chain is small. The reason for that is that our goal is to have farmer replot half of their plot when the history doubles. So as you can imagine, doubling from 1 gigabyte to 2 gigabytes is not very difficult. So you will replot half of your disk or like half of your plot once that happens. But then once the chain is, let's say, 100 gigabytes, it takes more time to 200 gigabytes. And then if it's a terabyte, it takes even more time to get to 2 terabytes. So replotting speed will, unlike rate, will decrease over time. It will be mostly read-only, but you will do some writes from time to time. You don't really need a very high endurance SSD to be able to do that. But we'll see over time how it plays out, and we are certainly interested to hear experience. I saw a few community members had dashboards in Grafana where they were monitoring how many IOPS, how many reads and writes the software is doing. That was a very good insight and great contribution from them. So we are taking all of that into account as well.
There is another interesting question by Fumo696, and they are asking if there is any difference between, for example, like one 200 gigabytes plot or two by 100 gigabytes or four and each of with the size of 50 gigabytes, or that the reward should be similar for all of these cases, or they will be different.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question.
Yeah, I think I might be wrong with my calculations, but if I get it correctly, and I'm sorry, just correct me if that's wrong, because we're writing data in sectors, and each of the sector size is 1.05 gigabytes at the moment. It seems like if you're using like a 50 gigabyte hard drive, you will be able to fit like 47 sectors. But if you're using like 200 gigabytes, you will be actually, let me just run the calculations quickly. You'll be able to put like 190 full plots. So it means that if we multiply 47 by 4, we get 188. So if you use 4 separate 50 gigabytes drives, you will be overall able to plot like 188 sectors. But if you're using one 200 gigabyte hard drive, you will be able to plot 190 sectors. So it's 2 sectors more, and like you'll be seeing more rewards if you use one larger hard drive.
Yes, but no. So this is an implementation detail. On consensus level, we have a parameter that says how big the sector could be. It can be smaller, but that is the maximum. The reason for that, as I mentioned, is that you are doing one audit per sector. So if your sectors are bigger, then you are spending less IOPS, you are reading less data to actually do the audit. If you have smaller sectors, but more of them, that means you're doing way more reads, but some of the other operations are less compute intensive, which is not really a great trade-off because most of the time you are not doing compute unless you actually win the reward, which is not very frequent. So right now, the implementation works in a way that it has to have a multiple of plot sizes in the plot, or multiple of sector sizes in the plot. So if you have a bigger one, then rounding error is kind of less in absolute terms. But as you approach like terabytes, it doesn't really matter. However, technically, software could have created a very last sector, which is a little bit smaller, and occupy all of last few bytes that are left after rounding remainder. So I think this is one of those things that could be improved in software, just like tricky to handle. But it is certainly something that we can do, and certainly something that is probably worth implementing. So yes, it is the way that it works today, but it doesn't really have to be that way. Theoretically, there shouldn't be much difference. But again, if you have multiple smaller plots, then you will have more of those like fractional sectors. So technically, you're spending more IOPS. But if you have like 4 of them, it probably doesn't matter much.
Yeah, thanks, Nazar.
Yeah. Plot size seems to be a common concern. I read over a few questions, and I'm thankful to those ambassadors who are responding and community members who are pitching in. Is it, Nazar, maybe some guideline on our side that we could provide regarding this issue, or?
For disks?
Yeah,
Plot sizes?
yeah. There seems to be a number of questions regarding, what happens to performance as I increase plot size. What is the maximum plot size? Many plot size related questions. I don't know. Maybe if does it deserve a comment, a commentary for clarification. Yeah.
So technically, our software supports multiple plots, so you like can specify different locations for the plot to be stored, and that is primarily designed to handle different physical disks. And as you specify multiple plots, it will actually use more memory. I don't think it will use more CPU, because even one plot will use all the CPU you have, unless you have like 512 cores or something like that. Then it might not be able to, but otherwise it will. And in that sense, if you have one physical disk, you should use one plot. If you have more physical disks, you probably should have multiple plots and corresponding amount of memory, rather than constructing a RAID array, because it will be less efficient. The software knows how to deal with that. It knows that those are physical disks, and it can do scanning during farming in parallel rather than sequential, or like, it will basically leverage the properties of different physical drives, and that way it will be a better experience. But I cannot force you to do anything. It's just the guideline that I can have from like technical point of view.
Thank you so much, Nazar. Yeah, it certainly helps clarify a number of topics that were brought to the table by Penguin, Trader Shorts, and others who seem.
Yeah, there is a question about not so fast drives. As long as they are fast enough, just use them separately. I don't think it will help you with IOPS that much if you have them in RAID array, maybe. It's something you'll probably have to test. But as soon as it's a good enough, you should use them separately.
Okay. Well, thank you for the answer, Nazar. Just 09's questions. I truly hope we're not leaving anything out.
I think there are several questions about CPUs in different forms. In terms of CPUs, I think it is most optimized for x86 at this point. There are a few very compute-intensive operations which have implementation and assembly for x86 processors. The best would be to use either Ryzen processors, like any of them from the first to last, or Intel Skylake, which is Intel Core 6000 and newer processors. They have a few instructions that will be faster. It will work on others if you use the x86 64 v2 build, but it will be significantly slower on those. It will be worse experience. But those Skylake and Ryzen processors, they were out for like, I don't know, 5, 7, 10 years. Shouldn't be really a big deal to find those. But those will be the most optimal. There will be a few more things in the future. There will be operators. There will be proof of time provers. Those will have different hardware requirements. But even today, you can totally do it on ARM processor. It will just, it's not as optimized, but it will still be plenty fast. We have multiple teammates which are using M1s, M2s on the Mac side. It works perfectly fine. And if you test something that we didn't, do let us know.
Okay, there's questioning or when would you start incentivized testnet stage, Gemini 3, or another release like 3F. Now, we are aware that the word soon is a bit open to interpretation, that we communicated our goal to start the incentivized test soon. But we feel, no, the firmest commitment that we can provide now, although not an exact certain date, is that the requirements are known for that. The software components required have been implemented, and the team is happy. The testing has proved the network stable, and so that gives us optimistic hope that we can start very soon. And apologies that I can provide a specific date, but all the conditions and are there for it to start sooner rather than later, and we make sure we keep the community updated on any more precise response. Okay, I see. Nazar, thank you for responding some of the subsequent technical inquiries that emerged. I just want to make sure, as I parse over, that I didn't leave anyone out. And please, if we didn't answer any of those, feel free to spill the beans and post it on the chat.
Pradeep, just to add some further comments to you know, the readiness of the network. You know, this is a test net. There will be problems with the software. We may need to reset the network, and there's going to be a whole host of unknowns and surprises along the path. But that is what a test net's for, just to set everyone's expectations.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Of course, I just trying to give I guess an eagle-eyed view on the road ahead as we see progress during the test. But yes, like you highlighted, it is part of the journey to polish our way forward as we find more possible issues in this debugging phase. But we're still optimistic. All that considered, we're still optimistic we can sooner rather than later, possibly in the future, start the incentivized phase.
Oh, we're as eager as the community. There's no worries there. You know, it's the nature of software development.
Yeah, certainly. I'm happy to see a very lively chat on the specifics going on costs and so on different hardware requirement scenarios. And thank you, Nazar, for taking all of those.
Also wanted to mention a little reminder about our documentation initiative that we launched last month. Currently, what we are doing is doing an incentivized, best PR merged on the docs. Potentially a reward of $250 for the best PR that we see. So we're really just hoping to get some more contribution to the documentation, and would love to see, some more community contributions. So if you see any, slight little thing that's bothering you or something that's not right in the docs that you want to change, feel free to give it a shot, and we'd be happy to take a look, and you might even win a bounty from it. And obviously, if there's something that's a little bit more intensive that someone would like to work on, a little bit more grant-focused projects for the docs, feel free to reach out to the team as well, and we'd be happy to participate and, talk with you about what we could do. Just wanted to mention that, as, we're always looking for to make that process as smooth as possible. And obviously, you all being users have the best insight on, where those pain points are. Ready, Pradeep? Well, should we wrap it up?
Yeah, I would just giving a chance for our fellow community members to post. I see a lot of typing in the chat. Just want to make sure no question was left unanswered. But
No.
but yes, I mean we are about time, and again, we feel really thankful for participating, for showing up. We peaked the audience today at 62, which shows your curiosity, your readiness, your engagement. We are so thankful to witness it. And if there's any question, of course, that was not maybe addressed here in the chat, our channels are still open. Discord forum. We're more than happy to cover those. Again, thank you, Nazar, for being here, for illuminating some of our current upgrades and the path ahead of us. Thank you, Emil, and Jim for joining us and sharing your experience and your journey so far, and helping out, answering many of the concerns on the chat. And this is really exciting to see all this interactivity. Is a really a positive sign that we can still work together in a powerful trend. If there's no other pressing issues, I'll from the stage. I'll be happy to wrap it up. Okay. So thanks again. Yeah. I'm glad to hear this was an informative session, and well, I'll see you on the other side. Look forward to your considerations and questions on Discord and forum. Thank you so much for turning up. Let's keep gearing up and moving ahead.
Thanks for
Thanks,
great
everyone.
questions.
Thanks, everybody.